The rain came down in sheets that November morning, drumming against the tin roof of the small rental house where Elena Vasquez had lived for the past 8 months. It was the kind of rain that felt personal, relentless, as though the sky itself had singled her out for punishment. She stood at the kitchen window, watching water cascade from a broken gutter, pooling in the yard, where her daughter's rusty swing set leaned at an angle, half submerged in mud. The eviction notice sat on the counter behind her, crisp and official. Its words burned into her memory, though she had not looked at it since yesterday. 30 days. That was all she had left before she and her daughter would be on the street. The notice cited non-payment of rent, which was true, though it failed to mention that the landlord had raised the rent twice in 6 months, or that Elena worked 2 jobs and still could not keep pace with the rising cost of survival. She was 34 years old, a single mother, and she felt 100. Her body ached from long shifts at the diner where she waited tables, her feet swollen in shoes held together with duct tape. At night, after her daughter was asleep, she cleaned office buildings downtown, pushing a mop through fluorescent-lit hallways while security guards barely glanced her way. She had become invisible to the world, just another face in the margins, struggling to hold on. The phone on the counter buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She picked it up, expecting another bill collector, another automated voice demanding money she did not have. Instead, it was her cousin Maria, calling from across town. Elena answered with a weary hello, bracing herself for whatever news came next. Maria's voice was tight, clipped with irritation. "Elena, I need you to make a decision. We're cleaning out Abuelo's house this weekend, and if you want anything, you need to come get it now. Otherwise, it's all going to the dump." Elena's throat tightened. Her grandfather, Ramon Vasquez, had died 3 weeks earlier at the age of 91. She had not been able to afford the funeral, had not even seen him in his final days, because she could not take time off work. The guilt sat heavy in her chest, a stone she carried everywhere. Now his house, the place where she had spent summers as a child, was being emptied like it had never mattered. "What's left?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Her uncle and his children had descended on the house like vultures the day after Ramon died, taking everything of value. The silver candlesticks, the antique clock, the wedding ring he had worn for 60 years. They had left her nothing, citing debts and expenses, though everyone knew they simply did not think she deserved a share. Maria sighed, the sound heavy with annoyance. "Just junk, honestly. Some old furniture nobody wants. That wardrobe in his bedroom, you know, the big ugly one. If you want it, fine, but you have to haul it out yourself. We're not paying movers for that thing." Elena closed her eyes. She knew the wardrobe. It had stood in her grandfather's bedroom for as long as she could remember, a hulking piece of dark wood that dominated the small room. It was old, scarred with age, its doors warped from years of humidity. As a child, she had hidden inside it during games of hide-and-seek, breathing in the scent of cedar and old fabric. Her grandfather used to tell her it had belonged to his father, brought over from the old country, though he never said which country or why it mattered. "Nobody wants it," Maria continued. "It's too big, too heavy. And honestly, Elena, it's an eyesore. If you don't take it, we're junking it. I'm serious. This is your last chance." Elena felt a flicker of something she could not quite name. Not hope, exactly, but something close to defiance. Everyone had taken what they wanted, left her with scraps, and now they were offering her garbage as though it were a favor. Yet the wardrobe meant something to her, even if it meant nothing to them. It was a piece of her grandfather, a memory she could hold on to when everything else had been stripped away. "I'll take it," she said quietly. Maria made a sound of disbelief. "Are you serious? Elena, where are you even going to put it? You're barely keeping your head above water as it is." "I'll figure it out," Elena said, her voice firmer now. "I'll be there Saturday." "Fine," Maria said, her tone clipped. "But don't say I didn't warn you." The call ended, and Elena set the phone down, her hands trembling slightly. She had no idea where she would put the wardrobe, no idea how she would even move it. But something in her refused to let it go. It was foolish, impractical, the decision of a woman who should have been focused on survival, not sentiment. Yet it felt important, like a thread connecting her to something larger than her own desperation. That night, soon after her shift at the diner, she sat at the kitchen table with her daughter, Sophia, a bright-eyed 7-year-old who still believed the world was good. Sophia was doing homework, her pencil scratching across a page of math problems, her tongue poking out in concentration. Elena watched her, feeling the familiar ache in her chest. She had failed at so much, but she would not fail Sophia. "Mama," Sophia said, looking up suddenly. "Why do you look sad?" Elena forced a smile. "I'm not sad, mija. Just tired." Sophia tilted her head, unconvinced. "You're always tired." "I know," Elena whispered, "but things will get better. I promise." It was a lie, or at least it felt like one. She had been making that promise for years, and nothing had improved. If anything, the world had only grown harder, sharper, less forgiving. Yet she could not bring herself to tell Sophia the truth, that they might soon be homeless, that the eviction notice meant their small, leaking house would soon be gone. Saturday arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning that felt more like an ending than a beginning. Elena borrowed a truck from a coworker, a rusted Chevy that groaned and sputtered, but still ran. She left Sophia with a neighbor and drove across town to her grandfather's house, her stomach tight with dread. The house looked smaller than she remembered, its paint peeling, the yard overgrown with weeds. Her uncle's car was already parked in the driveway, and she could hear voices inside, sharp and impatient. She hesitated at the door, then knocked, though it was technically still her grandfather's house, at least for a few more days until the estate was settled. Her uncle, Don Carlos, opened the door. He was a tall man with a hard face, someone who had always looked at Elena as though she were an inconvenience. "You're late," he said by way of greeting. "I'm here for the wardrobe," Elena said, keeping her voice steady. Carlos snorted. "Good luck with that. It weighs a ton." He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Inside, the house felt hollow, stripped of everything that had made it a home. The walls were bare, the rooms echoing with absence. Elena's cousins, Maria and her brother Javier, stood in the living room, sorting through boxes. They looked up as she entered, their expressions a mix of pity and disdain. "You're really taking that thing?" Javier said, shaking his head. "Elena, it's junk. You're wasting your time." "It was Abuelo's," Elena said simply. "So what?" Maria snapped. "He's gone. And that wardrobe is just taking up space. You should sell it for scrap wood if you can even find someone to haul it." Elena did not respond. She walked past them, down the narrow hallway to the bedroom where the wardrobe stood. The room was empty now, the bed gone, the curtains pulled down. Only the wardrobe remained, massive and dark, its surface dulled by time. She placed her hand on the wood, feeling the grain beneath her palm, and for a moment, she could almost hear her grandfather's voice, soft and patient, telling her stories in Spanish while she sat at his feet. Carlos appeared behind her. "You need help moving it?" "I'll manage," Elena said, though she had no idea how. "Suit yourself," he said with a shrug. "But you're on your own. We're not breaking our backs for a piece of garbage." It took her nearly 3 hours to move the wardrobe. She dismantled it as best she could, removing the doors, the drawers, anything that would lighten the load. Even then, the main frame was impossibly heavy, and she had to drag it inch by inch through the house, her muscles screaming, her hands blistered. Her uncle and cousins watched from the porch, drinking beer and laughing as she struggled. "This is pathetic," Javier said, loud enough for her to hear. "She's killing herself for a piece of junk." "Let her," Carlos said. "Maybe she'll learn." Elena ignored them. She focused on the truck, on the ramp she had fashioned from old planks, on the slow, agonizing process of getting the wardrobe loaded. By the time she finished, her shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold, so her arms shaking. She climbed into the driver's seat without looking back, without saying goodbye. She had what she came for, and she wanted nothing more from them. The drive home was tense, the truck groaning under the weight. She parked in front of her rental house and stared at the wardrobe through the rearview mirror, suddenly overwhelmed by the absurdity of it all. What was she going to do with it? Where would it even fit? The house was small, already crammed with second-hand furniture and Sophia's toys. There was no room for something so large. Yet she could not bring herself to leave it in the truck. She enlisted the help of her neighbor, an older man named Mr. Alvarez, and together they wrestled the wardrobe into the house. The only place it would fit was in her bedroom, wedged between the wall and the door, so it dominated the space, making the room feel even smaller. But Elena did not care. She stood before it, breathing hard, and felt a strange sense of accomplishment. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Elena sat on her bed and stared at the wardrobe. It looked out of place in the shabby room, too grand, too solid, as though it had wandered in from another world. She thought of her grandfather, of the way he had always treated her with kindness, even when the rest of the family dismissed her. He had been a quiet man, a man who kept his thoughts to himself, but he had always made her feel seen. She reached out and opened one of the doors. The interior was empty now, just bare wood and the faint scent of cedar. She ran her hand along the back panel, feeling the seams where the boards joined, and something about the way the wood fit together caught her attention. It seemed uneven, as though the back wall did not sit flush with the rest of the frame. Elena frowned. She pressed her palm against the panel, and it shifted slightly under the pressure. Her heart quickened. She pressed harder, and the panel gave way with a soft creak, revealing a narrow gap behind it. She pulled back, startled, then leaned in closer, peering into the darkness. There was a space behind the false back, a hidden compartment. Her breath caught. She grabbed her phone, turning on the flashlight, and shone it into the gap. At first, she saw nothing but shadow. Then the light caught something, a glint of metal, the edge of a box. She reached in, her fingers trembling, and pulled it out. It was a small metal box, old and tarnished, with a simple latch. Elena set it on the bed and stared at it, her mind racing. Why would her grandfather hide something in the wardrobe? What could be inside? She hesitated, almost afraid to open it, as though doing so might shatter whatever fragile hope had begun to stir within her. Finally, she flipped the latch. Inside the box were papers, yellowed with age, folded carefully. She unfolded the first one, her eyes scanning the handwriting. It was a letter, written in Spanish, dated 1962. The handwriting was her grandfather's. She recognized the careful loops, the way he formed his letters. The letter was addressed to his wife, Elena's grandmother, who had died long before Elena was born. It spoke of love, of dreams, of a future he wanted to build for his family. But it also mentioned something else, something that made Elena's pulse quicken. He wrote of a collection he had been building, something valuable, something he had hidden to protect it from those who might take it. Elena's hands shook as she unfolded the next paper. It was not a letter, but a list. Items, dates, values. She did not understand most of it, but she recognized enough to know it was some kind of inventory. At the bottom of the list, in her grandfather's hand, were the words, "For Elena, the only one who will understand." Tears pricked her eyes. He had left this for her, not for Carlos, not for Maria or Javier, but for her. She had thought herself forgotten, dismissed, but her grandfather had seen her. He had known she would need this, whatever it was. She set the papers aside and reached back into the hidden compartment, feeling around for more. Her fingers brushed against something else, no, something heavier. She pulled it out carefully. It was another box, larger this time, wrapped in oilcloth. She unwrapped it slowly, her heart pounding. Inside were documents, old documents, bound with string, their edges brittle. She did not dare unfold them all, not yet, but she saw enough to know they were important. Deeds, certificates, papers stamped with official seals. And beneath them, something that made her breath stop entirely. A leather-bound book, thick and heavy, its cover embossed with gold lettering. She opened it carefully, her hands trembling. Inside were pages filled with signatures, dates, descriptions. It was a catalog of some kind, meticulously maintained, each entry numbered and dated. Elena did not understand what she was looking at, but she knew it was significant. Her grandfather had hidden this for a reason. He had kept it secret even from his own children, and he had left it for her, the granddaughter everyone else had dismissed. She sat on the bed, surrounded by papers and boxes, her mind spinning. She did not know what any of this meant, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life was about to change. The wardrobe everyone had told her to trash, the piece of junk her family had mocked her for taking, held secrets worth protecting. And she was the only one who knew. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but Elena barely heard it. She gathered the papers carefully, her hands no longer shaking, and placed them back in the hidden compartment. Whatever her grandfather had left her, she would protect it. She would honor his trust. And she would prove to everyone who had dismissed her that she was more than they believed. The eviction notice still sat on the kitchen counter, but for the first time in months, Elena felt something other than despair. She felt the stirrings of hope, fragile and uncertain, but real. Her grandfather had given her a gift, and she would not let it go to waste. She closed the wardrobe doors and stood, her reflection staring back at her from the dark wood. She looked different somehow, stronger, as though the weight she had been carrying had shifted. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Sophia's soft breathing drifted from the next room, and Elena walked to the doorway, watching her daughter sleep. She had made a promise to Sophia, a promise that things would improve. For the first time, she believed it might actually be true. The wardrobe stood in the corner of her bedroom, silent and watchful, holding secrets that had waited decades to be uncovered. Elena did not yet know what those secrets were, but she knew she would find out. She owed that much to her grandfather, and she owed it to herself. As she climbed into bed, exhaustion finally pulling her under, her last thought was of the catalog, of the entries written in her grandfather's careful hand. Whatever he had hidden, it was hers now, and she would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. The next morning arrived too soon, the alarm clock dragging Elena from a fitful sleep. Her body ached from the previous day's exertion, every muscle protesting as she forced herself upright. The wardrobe loomed in the corner of her bedroom, its dark wood catching the pale morning light filtering through the blinds. For a moment, she wondered if she had dreamed it all, the hidden compartment, the papers, the catalog. But when she opened the doors and pressed against the false back panel, it gave way just as it had before, revealing the space where her grandfather's secrets lay waiting. She had no time to examine them further. Her shift at the diner started in an hour, and she still needed to get Sophia ready for school. She closed the compartment carefully, her mind already churning with questions she could not yet answer. What had her grandfather collected? Why had he hidden it so carefully? And why had he left it specifically for her? The questions followed her through the morning routine, through the rushed breakfast, and the drive to drop Sophia at school. They stayed with her as she tied her apron at the diner, as she poured coffee and took orders from customers who barely looked at her. She moved through the motions mechanically, her thoughts elsewhere, turning over the mystery like a puzzle she could not quite solve. During her break, she pulled out her phone and searched for information about antique collections, about hidden valuables, about anything that might give her a clue. The results were overwhelming, a flood of articles about art, coins, stamps, jewelry. She did not know where to start, did not even know what she was looking for. All she had were the papers and the catalog, and she had barely scratched the surface of what they contained. Her coworker, Linda, noticed her distraction. "You okay, honey? You seem a million miles away." Elena forced a smile. "Just tired. Didn't sleep well." Linda patted her shoulder sympathetically. I hear you. This job will wear you down if you let it." If only she knew. Elena returned to her tables, pushing the mystery to the back of her mind. She could not afford to lose focus, could not risk making mistakes that might cost her this job. But the catalog haunted her, its pages filled with entries she did not yet understand. That evening, after her shift ended, and she picked up Sophia from aftercare, Elena returned home to find an envelope taped to her front door. Her stomach dropped. Another notice from the landlord. Probably, or worse, an acceleration of the eviction timeline. She tore it open with trembling hands, but the contents surprised her. It was not from the landlord. It was from her uncle Carlos. The note was brief, typed, and impersonal. "Elena, we need to finalize Abuelo's estate. There may be additional items you're entitled to. Call me to arrange a meeting." She stared at the words, suspicion coiling in her gut. Carlos had never shown her kindness, had never treated her as entitled to anything. Why now? Why this sudden interest in making sure she got her share? She crumpled the note and tossed it on the counter. Whatever Carlos wanted, it had nothing to do with fairness or family. She knew him well enough to recognize a trap when she saw one. He must have heard she took the wardrobe, must have assumed there was a reason she wanted it. And if Carlos was sniffing around, it meant others would follow. She needed to understand what she had before anyone else came looking. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Elena returned to the wardrobe. She pulled out the papers and the catalog, spreading them across her bed. The lamplight cast shadows across the pages, making the faded ink difficult to read. She started with the letter, the one addressed to her grandmother. Her grandfather's words were intimate, filled with love and longing. But buried within the affection were hints of something more. He wrote of a passion he had discovered late in life, a hobby that had grown into an obsession. He spoke of traveling, of attending auctions, of acquiring pieces that spoke to him in ways he could not fully explain. He mentioned sacrifices he had made to build the collection, money saved, luxuries foregone. Elena's heart ached as she read. Her grandfather had lived modestly, almost frugally. She remembered his small house, the simple meals, the worn furniture. She had assumed he had little money, that he struggled as she did. But the letter suggested otherwise. He had money, or at least access to it, and he had spent it on something he cared deeply about. She set the letter aside and turned to the inventory. The list was meticulous, each entry numbered and dated. Item descriptions were brief but precise. Untitled, oil on canvas, signed lower right, 1923. Bronze sculpture, patina intact, provenance documented. Watercolor, unsigned, attributed to. The name that followed was smudged, unreadable. Elena's pulse quickened. These were not just objects. These were artworks. Her grandfather had been collecting art. She had never known, had never seen a single painting or sculpture in his house. Where had he kept them? How had he hidden an entire collection from his family? The catalog provided more answers. It was not just a list, but a detailed record. Each entry included a description, a date of acquisition, a purchase price, and notes about the piece's history. Some entries had photographs tucked between the pages, small black and white images of paintings and sculptures. Elena studied them, her hands shaking. She did not recognize any of the artists, did not know if the pieces were valuable or worthless, but her grandfather had cared enough to document them. He had cared enough to hide them. That had to mean something. One entry caught her attention. It was dated 1978, and the description read, "Portrait, oil on board, unsigned. Possible early work by," again, the name was obscured, this time by what looked like a water stain. But the purchase price made her breath catch, $5,000 in 1978. That was a significant amount of money, especially for someone living as modestly as her grandfather. She flipped through the pages, finding more entries with equally staggering prices. 10,000, 15,000, 20. By her rough calculation, her grandfather had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building this collection. Maybe more. The realization was dizzying. Where had he gotten the money? And where were the pieces now? The answer came to her slowly, piecing together fragments from the letter and the catalog. Her grandfather had not kept the collection in his house. He had stored it somewhere safe, somewhere his family would not find it. The wardrobe was not the hiding place for the art itself, but for the records, the proof of ownership, the key to finding what he had left behind. Elena's mind raced. If the collection was real, if the pieces were as valuable as the catalog suggested, then she was not just looking at a hobby. She was looking at a fortune her grandfather had hidden and left for her to find. But the thought brought as much fear as hope. If the collection was valuable, others would want it. Her uncle, her cousins, anyone who learned of its existence. She had seen how quickly family turned on each other when money was involved. She had watched Carlos and his children strip her grandfather's house bare, taking everything they could carry. If they knew about the art, they would come for it. They would fight her for it. They would claim it was theirs. She could not let that happen. Whatever her grandfather had left her, she would protect it. But first, she needed to find it. She returned to the hidden compartment, feeling along the walls, searching for anything she might have missed. Her fingers brushed against something small, wedged into a corner. She pulled it out carefully. It was a key, old and tarnished, attached to a small tag. The tag bore a single word, written in her grandfather's hand. Guardian. Elena stared at the key, her heart pounding. Guardian. Was that a name? A place? A clue to where the collection was hidden? She had no idea, but it was the only lead she had. She tucked the key into her pocket, her mind already spinning with plans. Tomorrow, she would start searching. She would follow every clue, unravel every mystery her grandfather had left behind. She did not know where the path would lead, but she knew she had to follow it. As she placed the papers back into the compartment and closed the wardrobe, she felt a strange sense of connection to her grandfather. He had trusted her with this, had believed she would understand, and she would not let him down. Outside, the night was quiet, the rain having finally stopped. Elena stood at the window, looking out at the dark street, and felt the weight of what lay ahead. She was a single mother, with barely enough money to survive, taking on a mystery that could change everything. It was reckless, impractical, perhaps even dangerous, but it was also the first real hope she had felt in years. She thought of the eviction notice, of the 30 days ticking away. She thought of Sophia, asleep in the next room, trusting that her mother would keep her safe. And she thought of her grandfather, who had spent decades building something extraordinary and had chosen her, of all people, to inherit it. She would not waste this chance. She would not let fear or doubt hold her back. Tomorrow she would begin the search, and whatever she found, she would face it with the same quiet strength her grandfather had shown throughout his life. The wardrobe stood silent in the corner, its secrets protected for now. But Elena knew that silence would not last. The world would soon learn what her grandfather had hidden, and when it did, everything would change. She just had to make sure she was ready. The next morning, Elena woke before her alarm, her mind already churning with possibilities. The key sat on her nightstand, where she had placed it the night before, its tarnished surface catching the early light. Guardian. The word circled in her thoughts, refusing to let her rest. What did it mean? Where did it lead? She got Sophia ready for school in a fog, her responses automatic, her thoughts elsewhere. Sophia chattered about a project due next week, about a friend who had brought cookies to share, but Elena barely heard. Her mind was consumed by the mystery her grandfather had left behind, by the collection that existed somewhere, waiting to be found. After dropping Sophia at school, Elena did not go to the diner. She called in sick, her voice hoarse with manufactured illness, guilt gnawing at her even as she lied. She could not afford to miss work, could not risk losing this job, but she also could not wait another day. The eviction deadline loomed, and if there was any chance the collection could save her, she needed to find it now. She drove to her grandfather's house, though she knew it was empty now, the estate sale scheduled for next week. Saw Carlos had already taken the keys, but Elena had kept a spare from years ago, a small act of defiance she had never thought she would need. She parked down the street, not wanting to draw attention, and walked to the back door. The house felt different in the daylight, hollower somehow, as though it knew its time was ending. Elena moved through the rooms slowly, searching for anything that might explain the key, the word guardian. She checked closets, cupboards, the small attic space filled with cobwebs and forgotten boxes. Nothing. In her grandfather's bedroom, she stood where the wardrobe had been, staring at the empty space on the wall. The room felt wrong without it, incomplete. She ran her hand along the baseboard, looking for loose panels, hidden compartments, anything. But there was nothing. Frustration built in her chest. She was missing something, some clue her grandfather had left. He would not have given her a key without a way to know where it led. She thought of the catalog, of the meticulous records he had kept. Every entry had been dated, every purchase documented. There had to be something in those pages, some hint she had overlooked. She returned home and spread the catalog across her bed once more, this time reading more carefully. She studied each entry, looking for patterns, for anything that might connect to the word guardian. Hours passed, the morning slipping into afternoon, and still she found nothing. Then, near the back of the catalog, she noticed something. A page that seemed thicker than the others, as though something had been glued beneath it. She held it up to the light and saw the faint outline of paper hidden underneath. With trembling hands, she carefully separated the layers, peeling back the top sheet to reveal what lay beneath. It was a business card, yellowed with age. The print was faded, but still legible. Guardian Storage Solutions, Secure Climate-Controlled Facilities. Established, 1955. Below that, an address in the industrial district across town, and a phone number. Elena's breath caught. Guardian was not a name or a clue. It was a storage company. Her grandfather had rented a unit there, had hidden the collection in a place where no one would think to look, and the key in her pocket would open it. She grabbed her phone and searched for the company. The website was outdated, barely functional, but it confirmed the address. The facility was still operating. though the reviews suggested it was run down, barely maintained. Elena did not care. If her grandfather's collection was there, she would find it. She drove across town, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The industrial district was a tangle of warehouses and chain-link fences, the kind of neighborhood that looked worse in daylight than at night. Guardian Storage sat at the end of a potholed street, its sign rusted and leaning at an angle. The building itself was a squat concrete structure, its windows barred, its paint peeling. Elena parked and walked to the office, a small room attached to the main building. Inside, an elderly man sat behind a desk, reading a newspaper. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Help you?" he asked, his voice rough. Elena held up the key. "I need to access a unit. My grandfather rented it. Elena Vasquez." The man's expression did not change. "Got proof you're authorized." She had not thought of that. She fumbled in her purse, pulling out her ID, her grandfather's obituary clipped from the newspaper. "He passed away. I'm his granddaughter. He left me this key." The man studied the documents, his face impassive. "Unit number?" Elena's stomach sank. The key had no number on it, just the word, Guardian. "I don't know. Can you look it up?" The man sighed, as though she had asked him to climb a mountain. He turned to an ancient computer, its screen flickering, and typed slowly. After what felt like an eternity, he grunted. "Vasquez, Unit 47. Rent's paid through the end of the year. After that, it goes to auction." Relief flooded through her. "Can I see it?" "Sign here." He pushed a clipboard toward her, and she scribbled her name. He handed her a second key, the newer than the one she carried. "That'll open the building. Your key opens the unit. Lock up when you're done." She thanked him and stepped back outside, her pulse racing. The main building loomed before her, a maze of corridors and metal doors. She found the entrance and let herself in, the air inside cool and stale, smelling of concrete and dust. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. Unit 47 was at the far end of the hall, tucked into a corner. Elena stood before it, the key heavy in her hand. This was it. Whatever her grandfather had hidden, it was on the other side of this door. She inserted the key, her hand shaking, and turned it. The lock clicked open. She pulled the door up, the metal groaning on its tracks, and stepped inside. The unit was larger than she expected, 10 by 20 feet, as its walls lined with wooden crates and boxes. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting weak light across the space. Elena reached for the pull string and flooded the unit with light. Her breath stopped. The crates were stacked neatly, each one labeled with numbers that matched the catalog. She approached the nearest one, her hands trembling, and pried open the lid. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, was a painting. She lifted it carefully, unwrapping the fabric to reveal the canvas beneath. It was a portrait, just as the catalog had described. A woman's face, rendered in oil, her expression serene and distant. The colors were rich, the brushstrokes confident. Elena did not recognize the style, did not know if it was valuable, but even to her untrained eye, it was beautiful. She set it aside and opened another crate. Another painting, this one a landscape, vibrant with color. Then another, a still life of flowers in a vase. Each piece was carefully packed, meticulously preserved. Her grandfather had not just collected art. He had curated it, protected it, ensured it would survive. Elena moved through the unit, opening crate after crate, her awe growing with each piece she uncovered. There were dozens of paintings, sculptures, drawings, prints. Some were small, intimate works. Others were large, commanding. The variety was staggering, and Elena could only guess at their value. But it was the last crate, tucked in the back corner, that made her knees weak. She opened it carefully, and inside, wrapped in layers of cloth, was a painting unlike any of the others. It was larger, more ambitious, depicting a crowded scene of figures in a garden. The detail was extraordinary, each face distinct, each gesture deliberate. And in the corner, barely visible, was a signature. Elena's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, searching for the name. The results made her head spin. The artist was famous, a master whose work sold for millions. She checked the catalog, finding the entry. Her grandfather had purchased it in 1965 for $12,000. According to the search results, a similar piece had sold at auction 2 years ago for $38 million. $38 million. For one painting. Elena sank to the floor, her legs giving out. She stared at the painting, at the signature, at the proof that her grandfather had not just collected art. He had collected masterpieces. The catalog listed over 200 pieces. If even a fraction of them were as valuable as this one, the collection was worth a fortune beyond anything she could comprehend. She sat in the storage unit, surrounded by her grandfather's legacy, and felt the weight of it settle over her. This was not just money. It was responsibility. It was danger. It was a secret so vast it could destroy her if she was not careful. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to reality. It was a text from Maria. "Carlos wants to know if you found anything in the wardrobe. He's asking a lot of questions. What should I tell him?" Elena's blood ran cold. Carlos was already suspicious. If he learned about the collection, he would stop at nothing to claim it. He would argue that it belonged to the estate, that it should be divided among all the heirs. He would tie her up in legal battles she could not afford, or would drag her through courts until she had nothing left. She typed back quickly. "Nothing. Just old papers. Tell him I'm keeping the wardrobe for sentimental reasons." The lie felt flimsy, but it was all she had. She could not let anyone know what she had found. Not yet. Not until she understood what she was dealing with. She stood, her mind racing. She needed help. She needed someone who understood art, who could tell her what the collection was really worth. But who could she trust? Anyone she told would want a piece of it, would see dollar signs instead of her grandfather's legacy. She thought of the paintings, of the care her grandfather had taken to preserve them. He had not done this for money. He had done it for love, for passion, for the belief that these pieces mattered. And he had left them to her, trusting she would understand. She would not betray that trust. She would protect the collection, no matter what it took. Elena locked the unit and returned to her car, her mind spinning with plans. She needed to move carefully, to keep the discovery secret while she figured out what to do next. But even as she drove home, she could feel the walls closing in. Her family was already asking questions. The eviction deadline was still counting down. And somewhere, people who made their living from art and antiquities would soon learn that a massive collection had surfaced. The danger was just beginning. That night, Elena could not sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts consumed by the storage unit and everything it contained. 200 pieces, millions of dollars, a fortune that could change her life. That could save her from eviction, from poverty, from the endless struggle that had defined her existence for as long as she could remember. But it could also destroy her. She thought of her grandfather, of the modest life he had lived, despite the wealth he had accumulated. He could have sold the collection at any time, could have lived in comfort, enjoyed luxuries. Instead, he had kept it hidden, had died without telling anyone. Why? The answer came to her slowly. He had been protecting it, not from thieves or the government, but from his own family, from Carlos and his children, who would have sold it without hesitation, who would have seen only profit and not the beauty, the history, the meaning behind each piece. Her grandfather had known what they were, and he had chosen Elena because he believed she would see what he saw, that she would protect the collection the way he had. But Elena was not an art expert. She was a waitress, a cleaning woman, a single mother barely holding on. How was she supposed to protect something so valuable when she did not even know where to start? The next morning, she made a decision. She would find an appraiser, someone reputable who could tell her what the collection was worth. Not to sell it, not yet, but to understand what she was dealing with. She searched online, looking for art appraisers in the area, and found a name that appeared repeatedly in reviews. Dr. Margaret Chen, a professor of art history at the local university, who also ran a private appraisal business. Elena called the number listed, her hands shaking. A polished voice answered. "Chen Appraisals." "I need an appraisal," Elena said, her voice barely steady. "A large collection. Paintings, sculptures. I think some of them might be valuable." There was a pause. "How large?" "Over 200 pieces." Another pause, longer this time. "That's quite extensive. May I ask how you acquired them?" "They were my grandfather's. He left them to me." "I see." The voice softened slightly. "I'd need to see them before I can give you an estimate. Can you bring photographs?" Elena hesitated. She did not have photographs, had not thought to take any. "Can you come to the storage facility? I can show you everything." There was a long silence. Finally, the voice said, "I can arrange a consultation, but I charge $500 for an initial assessment." $500. Elena's stomach clenched. She barely had 50 in her account. But what choice did she have? "When can you come?" "Thursday afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll need the address." Elena gave her the information, her heart sinking. She had 3 days to come up with $500. She would have to pick up extra shifts, skip meals, maybe pawn something. It did not matter. She had to know what the collection was worth. She hung up and immediately called the diner, begging for more hours. Her manager, sympathetic but firm, told her there was nothing available. She tried the cleaning company next, with the same result. Panic clawed at her throat. She needed that money, needed the appraisal, needed answers. In desperation, she pulled out the small amount of jewelry she owned. A thin gold chain her mother had given her, a pair of earrings from her quinceañera. She took them to a pawn shop, her hands shaking as she handed them over. The man behind the counter barely glanced at them before offering her $200. It was not enough, but it was something. She took the cash and left, feeling as though she had sold a piece of herself. Over the next 2 days, she scraped together the rest. She sold an old guitar that had belonged to Sophia's father, a man who had vanished before his daughter was born. She skipped meals, feeding Sophia, but eating nothing herself. She searched the house for anything of value, anything she could part with. By Wednesday night, she had $475. Close enough. Thursday arrived cold and clear. Elena left work early, claiming a doctor's appointment, and drove to the storage facility. Dr. Chen was already there when she arrived, a tall woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. She wore a tailored coat and carried a leather briefcase, looking utterly out of place in the rundown neighborhood. "Ms. Vasquez?" she asked, extending a hand. Elena shook it, feeling small and shabby beside this polished professional. "Thank you for coming." "Of course." Dr. Chen's gaze swept over the building, her expression neutral. "Shall we?" Elena led her to Unit 47, her heart pounding. She unlocked the door and pulled it open, revealing the rows of crates inside. Dr. Chen stepped in, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the sheer volume of pieces. "My goodness," she said softly. "Your grandfather was quite the collector." "I didn't know," Elena said. He never told anyone. Dr. Chen set down her briefcase and pulled out a pair of white gloves. May I? Elena nodded, and the appraiser moved to the nearest crate, opening it with practiced efficiency. She lifted the painting inside, studying it carefully, her expression unreadable. She set it aside and moved to another crate, then another, her movements methodical. Minutes stretched into an hour. Elena stood to the side, barely breathing, watching as Dr. Chen examined piece after piece. The appraiser said nothing, her face a mask of professional composure. But Elena saw the way her hands lingered on certain paintings, the way her eyes narrowed with focus. Finally, Dr. Chen straightened and turned to Elena. Her expression was serious, almost grave. Ms. Vasquez, I need to be very clear with you. What you have here is not just a collection. It's a museum-quality archive. Some of these pieces are extremely valuable. Elena's mouth went dry. How valuable? Dr. Chen pulled out a notepad, flipping through pages of notes she had taken. I've identified at least 15 pieces by recognized masters, several more that I believe could be attributed to significant artists with proper authentication, and dozens of works by lesser-known but highly collectible artists. What does that mean? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Chen met her eyes. Conservatively, based on what I've seen in the last hour, I would estimate this collection to be worth somewhere between $50 and $75 million. Possibly more. The world tilted. Elena reached out to steady herself against the wall, her legs threatening to give out. 50 million. 75 million. The numbers were incomprehensible, too large to be real. That's not including the piece in the back, Dr. Chen continued, her voice measured. The large canvas with the garden scene. If that's authentic, and I have every reason to believe it is, that single painting could be worth anywhere from 30 to 60 million on its own. Elena could not speak, could not think. The room spun around her, and she sank to the floor, her head in her hands. Dr. Chen knelt beside her, her voice gentle now. I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand something. A collection of this magnitude will attract attention. Serious attention. From collectors, museums, auction houses, and not all of that attention will be friendly. Elena looked up, her vision blurred with tears. What do I do? First, you secure it. Make sure no one else knows about this until you're ready. Second, you get proper authentication for the major pieces. That will take time and money, but it's essential if you want to realize their full value. Third, you hire a lawyer, someone who specializes in estate law and art collections. I don't have money for any of that, Elena said, her voice breaking. Dr. Chen's expression softened. I can help you. Not for free, but I can work with you on payment. This collection is too important to let it slip through the cracks because you lack resources. Elena wiped her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. Why would you help me? Because your grandfather clearly cared about these pieces, and because I believe they should be protected, not scattered or sold to the highest bidder without regard for their significance. Dr. Chen stood, offering Elena her hand. But you need to decide what you want. Do you want to sell the collection? Donate it? And keep it? Elena took her hand and stood, her legs still shaky. I don't know. I haven't had time to think. Then think about it. But in the meantime, tell no one about this. Not your family, not your friends. No one. The moment word gets out, you'll be under siege. Elena nodded, though her mind was reeling. 50 million. 75 million. A fortune beyond imagination, hidden in a storage unit in the worst part of town. Dr. Chen gathered her things, tucking her notes into her briefcase. I'll prepare a preliminary report for you. It won't be cheap, but it will give you leverage if you decide to pursue authentication or sale. In the meantime, change the locks on this unit. Install a security camera if you can, and do not, under any circumstances, let anyone else inside." "Thank you," Elena whispered. "Doctor." Chen paused at the door, her expression serious. "Ms. Vasquez, you've stumbled onto something extraordinary. But extraordinary things attract extraordinary problems. Be careful." She left, and Elena stood alone in the storage unit, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of art. She should have felt elated, triumphant. Instead, she felt terrified. Because Dr. Chen was right. The moment people learned about this, everything would change. And Elena was not sure she was ready for what came next. That night, Elena sat at her kitchen table. The preliminary invoice from Dr. Chen spread before her. $500 for the initial consultation, as agreed. But the full appraisal, with authentication and provenance research, would cost $15,000. Maybe more, depending on how many pieces required expert analysis. $15,000. It might as well have been 15 million. She did not have it, could not get it. The eviction notice still sat on the counter, mocking her. She had a fortune in art, but no way to access it, no way to turn it into the cash she desperately needed. She thought about selling one piece, just one, to cover the immediate costs. But Dr. Chen had warned her against that. Without proper authentication, she would get a fraction of what the pieces were worth. And the moment she tried to sell, word would spread. Auction houses would start asking questions. Her family would hear. The whole fragile secret would come crashing down. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was Carlos. She almost did not answer, but fear that her silence would raise more suspicion made her pick up. Hello? Elena." His voice was smooth, falsely friendly. "How are you? How's Sophia?" "We're fine," she said, her throat tight. "Good. Good. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about Abuelo's estate. There are some things we need to finalize, and I was thinking, maybe you and I could sit down, go over everything together." Elena's pulse quickened. "What things?" "Just paperwork, making sure everything's divided fairly. You know how these things go." She knew exactly how these things went. Carlos wanted to make sure she was not hiding anything, wanted to search for whatever value he suspected the wardrobe might hold. "I don't think there's anything left to divide," she said carefully. "You and your kids already took everything." "Now, Elena, that's not fair. We only took what was owed to us. But I've been thinking. Maybe we were too hasty. Maybe there's something we overlooked." "There's nothing," she said, her voice firmer now. "Just the wardrobe, and I'm keeping it." "That old thing?" Carlos laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Why would you want that? It's just taking up space." "It was Abuelo's. That's reason enough." There was a pause, and when Carlos spoke again, his voice had hardened. "Elena, if you found something, you need to tell me. Whatever it is, it belongs to the estate, to all of us." "I didn't find anything," she lied. "And even if I did, Abuelo left the wardrobe to me. Whatever was in it is mine." "That's not how it works." His voice was cold now, the pretense of friendliness abandoned. "Anything of value is part of the estate. I've already talked to a lawyer. If you're hiding something, I'll find out. And when I do, so I'll take you to court." The line went dead. Elena set the phone down, her hands trembling. Carlos knew. Maybe not the details, but he knew she had found something. And he would not stop until he took it from her. She thought of the paintings, of the millions of dollars sitting in that storage unit. She thought of Sophia, of the eviction notice, of the life she had been fighting so hard to build. And she realized, with perfect clarity, that she was not going to let Carlos or anyone else steal what her grandfather had left her. She had been invisible for too long, dismissed and overlooked. But not anymore. She had something worth fighting for now. And she would fight, no matter what it cost. The wardrobe stood in the corner of her bedroom, silent and watchful. Elena looked at it, remembering the day she had dragged it home, exhausted and mocked by her family. They had laughed at her, called her foolish, told her she was wasting her time. But she had been right. She had trusted her instincts, had refused to let them discard what mattered. And now she held the key to a fortune they could not imagine. The battle was just beginning. But Elena was ready. The days following Carlos's phone call were tense, every sound making Elena jump. Every car that slowed near her house, sending her pulse racing. She knew he was watching, waiting for her to make a mistake, and she knew she could not afford to give him any opening. Dr. Chen called 3 days later with an update. "I've completed the preliminary report," she said, her voice carrying a note of excitement Elena had not heard before. "But I need to discuss something with you in person. Can you meet me at my office?" Elena arranged for Sophia to stay with a neighbor and drove to the university. Dr. Chen's office was in the art history building, a cramped space lined floor to ceiling with books and framed prints. The appraiser gestured for Elena to sit, then closed the door carefully before taking her own seat. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Dr. Chen began, her eyes bright. "And I've never seen a collection like your grandfather's, not in private hands, not outside of major museums." Elena's mouth went dry. "What did you find?" Dr. Chen pulled out a folder, spreading photographs across her desk. Each one showed a different piece from the storage unit, professionally lit and documented. "I've identified 23 works by recognized masters, not just significant artists, but the giants of their respective movements. Your grandfather had an extraordinary eye." She pointed to one photograph, the garden scene Elena had seen that first day. "This piece alone is museum quality. I've consulted with colleagues in New York and London. The consensus is that it's authentic, and if it goes to auction, it could sell for anywhere from $50 to $90 million. $90 million. For one painting. Elena felt the room tilt around her. "But that's not all," Dr. Chen continued. "There are 6 other pieces in similar category. Major works by artists, whose paintings rarely come to market. Together, just those 7 pieces could bring in $250 to $300 million. Elena could not breathe. The numbers were too large, too impossible. And the rest? The remaining pieces vary widely in value. Some are worth thousands, others millions. Conservatively, and I mean very conservatively, the entire collection is worth approximately $341 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena sat frozen, her mind unable to process what she was hearing. $341 million. It was more money than she had imagined in her wildest dreams, more than seemed possible for one person to possess. "However," Dr. Chen said, her tone shifting, realizing that value will require significant work. "Each major piece needs formal authentication, provenance research, conservation where necessary. That process will take months, possibly years, and it will cost money you do not currently have." "How much?" Elena whispered. For a collection of this scope, you're looking at anywhere from $50,000 to several $100,000 in appraisal fees, conservation costs, legal fees, insurance, storage. And that's before you even consider how to sell or donate the pieces." Elena's brief moment of hope shattered. She had a fortune in art, but she was still broke, still facing eviction, still powerless. "I don't have that kind of money. I don't have any money." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression serious. "I know, which is why I have a proposal. I have connections with several major auction houses and private collectors. With your permission, I can reach out to them, explain the situation, and arrange for advance funding. They would cover the authentication costs in exchange for the right to handle the eventual sale. What's the catch? They'll take a commission, usually 15 to 20% of the final sale price. But in exchange, you get immediate access to funds, professional handling of the collection, and protection from legal challenges. Elena's mind raced. 20% of $341 million was still an unimaginable fortune. But it also meant trusting strangers with her grandfather's legacy, putting the collection in the hands of people who saw only profit. I need time to think, she said. Of course. But Elena, I need you to understand something. The moment word gets out about this collection, which it will, you'll be under enormous pressure. From your family, from the art world, or from people you've never met who will claim some right to it. You need protection, and you need it soon. Elena nodded numbly, taking the folder Dr. Chen offered. Inside were the photographs, the preliminary valuation, and contact information for 3 major auction houses. She thanked the appraiser and left, her head spinning. She sat in her car for a long time, staring at the folder. $341 million. The number kept echoing in her mind, impossible and terrifying. She thought of her grandfather, of the quiet man who had lived in a small house, driven an old car, worn the same clothes year after year. He had possessed this fortune all along, and he had never spent it, never used it to make his life easier. Why? What had driven him to build this collection? To sacrifice comfort and security for paintings he kept hidden in a storage unit? She thought of the letter he had written, the one she had found in the wardrobe. He had spoken of beauty, of preserving something meaningful for the future. He had not collected art for profit, but for love, and he had trusted Elena to understand that. The weight of that trust settled over her like a mantle. She could not fail him. She would not let greed or fear corrupt what he had built. But she also could not let her family steal it, could not let Carlos and his lawyers strip her of what was rightfully hers. She needed help. Real help. The kind of help that cost money she did not have. That night, Elena made a decision that terrified her. She would accept Dr. Chen's proposal, would reach out to the auction houses, would let professionals help her navigate the impossible situation she found herself in. It was a risk, trusting strangers with something so valuable. But the alternative was to stand alone against forces she could not fight. She called Dr. Chen the next morning and gave her permission to contact the auction houses. Within hours, her phone was ringing. First, a representative from Sotheby's, then Christie's, then a private gallery in New York she had never heard of. Each one wanted to meet with her, to see the collection, to discuss terms. Elena felt overwhelmed by the attention, by the sudden shift from invisibility to being courted by some of the most powerful people in the art world. Dr. Chen guided her through the conversations, helped her understand what each offer meant, what the implications were. In the end, Elena chose Christie's. They offered a comprehensive package, full authentication and conservation, legal support, insurance, and an advance of $100,000 against the eventual sale. The money would be hers immediately, enough to pay off the eviction, cover Sophia's needs, and give her breathing room to make decisions without desperation clouding her judgment. The contract arrived 2 days later, dense with legal language Elena barely understood. Dr. Chen walked her through it, explaining each clause, each obligation. Elena signed with a shaking hand, feeling as though she were stepping off a cliff into open air. The advance arrived in her bank account the next day. Elena stared at the balance on her phone, at the number that had appeared overnight. $100,000. It was more money than she had earned in the last 5 years combined. She paid the back rent immediately, then the utilities, then bought groceries without checking prices for the first time in her life. That evening, she took Sophia out for dinner at a real restaurant, not fast food or the diner where she worked. Sophia's eyes went wide at the menu, at the choices, at the dessert cart that rolled past their table. "Mama, can we really afford this?" Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, mija, we can." But even as they ate, even as Sophia chattered excitedly about her ice cream sundae, Elena felt the shadow of what was coming. The advance was just the beginning. The real battle was about to start. Carlos found out within the week. Elena never learned how, or whether someone at the bank had talked, or whether he had been watching her accounts. But one evening, as she was putting Sophia to bed, there was a pounding on her door. She looked through the peephole and saw Carlos, his face red with fury, flanked by Javier and Maria. Her stomach dropped. She considered not answering, but the pounding grew louder, and she did not want Sophia frightened. She opened the door, but kept the chain latched. "What do you want?" "You lying bitch," Carlos snarled. "You found something. I knew it. What was it? Money? Jewelry? And you've been hiding it this whole time." "I don't know what you're talking about," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Don't lie to me. I checked your bank records. Suddenly you have money? Where did it come from?" Elena's blood ran cold. He had been spying on her, violating her privacy. "That's none of your business." "The hell it isn't. Whatever you found belonged to Abuelo, which means it belongs to the estate, to all of us. You had no right to keep it." "Abuelo left the wardrobe to me," Elena said. "Whatever was in it is mine." Carlos's face twisted with rage. "We'll see what a judge says about that. I'm filing a lawsuit. By the time I'm done with you, you won't have a penny left." He stormed off, his children following, and Elena closed the door, her hands shaking. She leaned against it, breathing hard, and heard Sophia call from her room. "Mama, what's wrong?" "Nothing, baby," Elena called back, forcing her voice to sound calm. "Just some people asking for directions." But it was not nothing. Carlos had declared war, and Elena knew he would not stop until he had destroyed her or taken everything she had. The lawsuit arrived 3 days later. Carlos was suing her for the full value of the estate, claiming she had concealed assets that should have been divided among all heirs. He was demanding an accounting of everything she had found, access to the storage unit, and immediate transfer of all items to the estate's control. Elena sat in the office of the lawyer Christie's had provided, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Torres, who specialized in estate disputes. Rebecca read the lawsuit carefully, her expression neutral. "This is aggressive," she said finally, "but not unexpected. Your uncle is fishing. He knows you found something, but he doesn't know what. If he did, this lawsuit would be very different." "Can he win?" Elena asked, her voice small. "That depends. Did your grandfather leave a will?" "Yes, it was very simple. Everything went to his children equally. But the wardrobe wasn't mentioned specifically. He left it to me separately, years ago. Gave it to me when I graduated high school. Said it would be mine someday." Rebecca's eyes sharpened. "Do you have any proof of that? A document? A witness? Anything?" Elena's heart sank. "No, it was just between us." "That complicates things. Without documentation, your uncle can argue that the wardrobe and its contents were part of the general estate. We'll have to fight this in court." "I can't afford a court battle," Elena whispered. "You don't have to. Christie's is covering your legal fees as part of the contract. But I need you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. Your family will attack you. I will try to paint you as a thief and a liar. They'll drag up every mistake you've ever made, every hardship, and use it against you. Are you prepared for that?" Elena thought of Sophia, of the life she was trying to build, She thought of her grandfather, of the trust he had placed in her. "Yes," she said. "I'm prepared." The months that followed were brutal. The lawsuit moved slowly through the courts, each hearing bringing new accusations, new attacks. Carlos hired an aggressive lawyer who painted Elena as a manipulative woman who had preyed on an old man's affection, who had stolen what rightfully belonged to the entire family. The local news picked up the story, running headlines about the hidden fortune and the family feud over dead man's art. Reporters camped outside Elena's house, shouting questions as she left for work. Neighbors whispered and stared. Sophia came home from school crying because other kids had said her mother was a thief. Through it all, Elena held on. Rebecca Torres was a force of nature in the courtroom, dismantling Carlos's arguments one by one. She brought in handwriting experts who confirmed that the letter Elena had found was genuine, written by her grandfather. She presented testimony from Dr. Chen about the collection's value and authenticity. She showed that Elena had done everything legally, had reported the find, had paid taxes on the advance. But Carlos would not give up. He brought in his own experts, who claimed the collection should have been part of the estate inventory. He argued that Elena had manipulated an old man, had stolen the wardrobe under false pretenses. He painted himself as the victim, the dutiful son trying to protect his father's legacy from a greedy relative. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Elena sat through every day of it, watching as her life was dissected in front of strangers. She listened as Carlos lied on the stand, claiming her grandfather had never intended for her to have the wardrobe, that he had been confused in his final years. She watched as Maria and Javier backed up their father's story, their faces hard with resentment. But she also watched as Rebecca presented the truth. The catalog, with its entries and dates proving her grandfather's meticulous care. The storage unit records, showing he had paid rent for decades. The letter in his own hand, saying the collection was for Elena. And finally, testimony from people who had known him, though neighbors and friends who said he had always spoken fondly of his youngest granddaughter, had always said she was the only one who understood him. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened to everything with a carefully neutral expression. When the testimony ended, she took 2 days to deliberate before calling the court back into session. Elena sat in the front row, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Sophia sat beside her, too young to fully understand, but old enough to know this mattered. Rebecca sat at the table, her face calm but her eyes sharp. The judge entered, and everyone stood. When they sat again, the room was so quiet, Elena could hear her own heartbeat. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented in this case," the judge began, her voice measured. "And I've considered the arguments from both sides. That this is a difficult situation, made more difficult by the lack of clear documentation regarding Mr. Vasquez's intentions." Elena's heart sank. She was going to lose. Carlos was going to take everything. "However," the judge continued, "I find the evidence presented by the defendant to be more compelling. The letter, the catalog, the care with which Mr. Vasquez maintained these records, all point to a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He chose to hide this collection, not from the world, but from his own family. And he chose to leave it to Ms. Vasquez through the wardrobe he had given her years earlier." Elena's breath caught. "Furthermore, I find the plaintiff's claims to be undermined by his own actions. He and his children systematically stripped Mr. Vasquez's home of everything valuable immediately after his death, leaving Ms. Vasquez with nothing but what they considered worthless. They cannot now claim that what they rejected should be theirs simply because it turned out to be valuable." Carlos half rose from his seat, his face purple with rage, but his lawyer pulled him down. "Therefore," the judge said, her voice ringing clear, "I rule in favor of the defendant. The collection and all items found in the wardrobe are the sole property of Elena Vasquez. The plaintiff's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiff to pay the defendant's legal fees as a penalty for bringing a frivolous lawsuit." The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted. Carlos was shouting, his lawyer trying to calm him. Rebecca was smiling, shaking Elena's hand. And Elena sat, frozen, unable to believe what she had just heard. She had won. The collection was hers, all of it. Sophia hugged her, crying. "Does this mean we don't have to move, Mama?" Elena pulled her daughter close, tears streaming down her own face. "No, baby. We don't have to move. We're going to be okay." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Elena said nothing. She let Rebecca handle the questions, while she and Sophia slipped away to the car. As she drove home, her hands still shaking, she felt something she had not felt in years. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Elena sat on her bed and stared at the wardrobe. It stood in the corner, solid and silent, the piece of furniture everyone had told her to trash. The piece she had fought for, struggled to move, refused to abandon even when it seemed foolish. Her grandfather had known, and he had known she would be the one to understand, the one who would value what he had built. And he had been right. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Christie's began the authentication process, bringing in experts from around the world to examine each piece. The garden scene that had first caught Elena's attention was confirmed as authentic, a lost masterpiece that had not been seen publicly in over 60 years. The auction house projected it would sell for at least $70 million. Other pieces were authenticated as well, each one adding to the collection's staggering value. The final tally, after all pieces were examined and valued, came to $341 million, exactly as Dr. Chen had predicted. Christie's proposed a series of auctions spread over 2 years, allowing each major piece to receive the attention it deserved. Elena agreed, but she also made another decision. She would donate several pieces to museums, particularly to institutions that could not otherwise afford such works. Her grandfather had collected for love, not profit. She would honor that by ensuring some pieces remained accessible to the public. The first auction took place on a clear spring evening at Christie's New York headquarters. Elena attended, wearing a dress she had never imagined she could afford, watching as collectors from around the world bid millions of dollars for her grandfather's treasures. The garden scene sold for $82 million, shattering auction records. By the time the final auction concluded 18 months later, Elena had netted, after all fees and donations, $270 million. It was a fortune beyond comprehension, enough to change not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. She paid off every debt she owed, then bought a house, not a mansion, but a comfortable home in a good neighborhood where Sophia could grow up safe. She set up trust funds for Sophia's education, for her future, ensuring her daughter would never struggle the way she had. But Elena did not forget where she had come from. She established a foundation in her grandfather's name, providing scholarships for children from low-income families, funding arts education programs in struggling schools, supporting working mothers who were trying to build better lives. She quit her jobs at the diner and the cleaning company, but not before giving generous bonuses to every coworker who had ever shown her kindness. She donated to the community center where Sophia had spent so many afternoons, to the food bank that had helped them through the hardest months. And she kept the wardrobe. Even though she could afford any furniture she wanted, even though she moved to a larger house with plenty of space, she kept the old, scarred piece in her bedroom. It stood as a reminder of where she had been, of the moment when everything changed. 2 years after finding the collection, Elena stood in her backyard, watching Sophia play on a new swing set. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The eviction notice that had once seemed like the end of the world was long gone, replaced by a deed with her name on it, security she had never dared dream of. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. The final authentication report had been completed on the last few pieces. Everything was documented, every question answered. Her grandfather's legacy was secure. Elena smiled, thinking of the old man who had spent decades building something beautiful in secret, who had trusted her to understand why it mattered. She wished she could thank him, could tell him she had protected what he built, had honored his memory. But in a way, she already had. The foundation bore his name. The museum donations ensured his taste and vision would be appreciated by future generations. And the life she had built for Sophia, the security and opportunities she could provide, were the greatest thanks she could offer. Maria had reached out a few months earlier, a tentative email apologizing for her role in the lawsuit. Elena had responded kindly, but maintained her distance. Some wounds took time to heal. Carlos, on the other hand, had never apologized, had never acknowledged his loss. Elena heard through mutual acquaintances that he was bitter, convinced she had cheated him somehow. She felt no anger toward him anymore, only pity. He had been so focused on what he thought he deserved that he could not see what he had lost. Her grandfather had known his children's natures, had known they would see only dollar signs. That was why he had hidden the collection, why he had left it to the one person he believed would understand. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena walked back into her house. The wardrobe stood in her bedroom, and she placed her hand on its worn surface, feeling the grain of the wood beneath her palm. "Thank you, abuelo," she whispered, "for trusting me, for seeing me when no one else did." She thought of the day she had hauled it home, exhausted and mocked, her family laughing at her foolishness. She thought of the months of struggle, of fear, of fighting for what was right. And she thought of the moment when everything had changed, when she had pressed against the false back and discovered the truth. Life was strange, she reflected. You could spend years struggling, years being invisible, years believing you were worthless. And then one moment, one decision, one act of faith could change everything. She had chosen to keep the wardrobe when everyone told her to throw it away. That choice had saved her life. Sophia called from the other room, asking for help with her homework. Elena smiled and walked to her daughter, ready to spend the evening in peace, in security, in the life she had fought so hard to build. The wardrobe remained in the bedroom, silent and watchful. Its secrets had been revealed, its treasure uncovered. But it still stood as a reminder, as a symbol of what faith and perseverance could achieve. Elena Vasquez had been a struggling single mother, invisible and dismissed. Now she was a philanthropist, a patron of the arts, a woman who had honored her grandfather's legacies and built a future for her daughter. All because she had refused to let others tell her what mattered. All because she had listened to her heart and held on to what was hers. The world had tried to make her small, to keep her in the margins. But she had found her voice, had claimed her inheritance, had stepped into the light. And she would never go back to the shadows again. Years later, when Sophia was grown and starting her own life, Elena would tell her the full story. She would explain how close they had come to losing everything, how the wardrobe everyone had mocked had held the key to their salvation. She would share her grandfather's letters, show her the catalog, help her understand the man who had given them this gift. And Sophia would understand, as Elena had understood, that the greatest treasures are not the ones we seek, but the ones we protect, the ones we refuse to abandon even when the world tells us they are worthless. The lesson her grandfather had taught her, Elena would pass on to her daughter, and the cycle of love, of faith, of perseverance would continue. As Elena settled into her comfortable life, and as she watched her foundation grow and change lives, as she saw Sophia thrive in ways she never could have imagined, she often thought of the storage unit. Of that first moment when she had pulled open the door and seen the crates, when she had unwrapped that first painting and felt her world shift. Guardian Storage still stood in the industrial district, though Elena no longer rented a unit there. But sometimes, when she drove past, she would slow down and look at the building, remembering. That was where her new life had begun. Not in the courtroom, not at the auction house, but in that dim, dusty space where her grandfather's dreams had waited for someone who would understand them. She had been that someone, and she had not let him down. The wardrobe stood in her bedroom, a silent witness to the journey she had taken. And every time she looked at it, Elena remembered not just where she had been, but how far she had come. From invisible to seen, from struggling to secure, from dismissed to vindicated. All because of a piece of furniture everyone told her to trash, and a grandfather who had believed she would be the one to understand. The week before the first major auction, Elena could not sleep. She would lie awake in her new bedroom, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions she could not answer. What if no one bid? What if the experts were wrong about the values? What if she had made a terrible mistake trusting Christie's, trusting Dr. Chen, trusting anyone? At 3 a.m, she would get up and walk to Sophia's room, standing in the doorway watching her daughter sleep. And Sophia had adjusted to their new life with the resilience of childhood, accepting the bigger house, the better school, the sudden absence of worry, with the easy grace of someone too young to remember just how close they had come to losing everything. But Elena remembered. She remembered the eviction notice, the empty refrigerator, the nights when she had cried herself to sleep, wondering how she would keep Sophia safe. The memories haunted her, whispering that this was all temporary, that any moment it could all vanish like smoke. One night, unable to bear the anxiety alone, she called Dr. Chen. It was late, past midnight, but the appraiser answered on the 3rd ring, her voice alert despite the hour. "Elena, what's wrong?" "I'm sorry," Elena said, her voice breaking. "I shouldn't have called. What if I've made a mistake? Well, what if the collection isn't worth what you said? What if—" "Stop," Dr. Chen said gently. "Elena, I've been doing this for 30 years. I have staked my professional reputation on this collection. Every piece has been authenticated by multiple experts. The provenance is solid. Your grandfather built something extraordinary, and the world is about to see it. But what if they don't care? What if no one wants to buy?" There was a pause, and when Dr. Chen spoke again, her voice was softer. "I'm going to tell you something I don't often share. 20 years ago, I authenticated a collection very similar to yours. A working-class family had inherited paintings from a grandmother who had worked as a housekeeper for a wealthy family in the 1920s. The family had given her several pieces over the years, small tokens of appreciation. No one thought they were valuable. What happened? The collection sold for $43 million. Not because the paintings were famous, but because they were beautiful, because they had been preserved with care, because they mattered. Your grandfather's collection is 10 times larger, 10 times more significant. Trust me when I say the world will care." Elena felt tears slide down her cheeks. "Thank you. Try to sleep. In a week, everything changes, but it changes for the better. I promise." The night before she left for New York, Elena drove to the cemetery where her grandfather was buried. She had not visited since the funeral, had been too consumed with survival to make the trip. But now, standing at the gates with a bouquet of white roses, she felt the weight of everything he had given her. While his grave was in the older section, beneath a sprawling oak tree. The headstone was simple, just his name and dates. Someone, probably Carlos, had left flowers weeks ago, now wilted and brown. Elena cleared them away and placed her fresh roses in the vase. She sat on the grass beside the grave, not caring that the ground was damp, and spoke to him as though he could hear. "I don't know if you can hear me, abuelo," she began, her voice soft. "But I need you to know that I understand now. Why you hid the collection. Why you left it for me. You knew they would never see what you saw. They would only see money." The wind rustled through the oak leaves, and for a moment Elena imagined it was his voice, gentle and patient as it had always been. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Tomorrow I'm going to New York. They're going to auction your paintings, the ones you spent your whole life collecting. And I'm terrified that I'm going to disappoint you, that I'm not doing this right." She wiped her eyes, her throat tight with emotion. "But I'm also grateful. You saved me, abuelo. You saved Sofia. I was drowning, and you threw me a lifeline even though you were already gone. How did you know? How did you know I would need this?" The cemetery was quiet, only the distant sound of traffic and birds breaking the silence. Elena stayed until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Before she left, she placed her hand on the headstone. "I'll make you proud," she whispered. "I promise." The flight to New York was Elena's first time on an airplane. Sofia sat beside her, pressed against the window, gasping with delight as the plane lifted off and the city below shrank to toy size. Elena gripped the armrests, her knuckles white, trying not to think about how high they were, how much could go wrong. But nothing went wrong. The plane landed smoothly at JFK, and a driver Christie's had sent was waiting with a sign bearing her name. The car was sleek and black, the interior smelling of leather and luxury. Sofia bounced in her seat, asking a million questions the driver answered with patient amusement. Their hotel was in Manhattan, a towering building with a lobby that gleamed with marble and gold. The suite Christie's had booked was larger than the house Elena had grown up in, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Sofia ran from room to room, shrieking with joy, while Elena stood at the window, overwhelmed by the impossibility of it all. That evening, Rebecca Torres met them for dinner at the hotel restaurant. She had flown in separately, bringing final documents for Elena to review. Over plates of food Elena barely touched, Rebecca walked her through the auction logistics, the expected attendees, the media strategy. "There will be reporters," Rebecca warned. "A lot of them. This is a major event, and your story has captured attention. Rags to riches, hidden treasure, family betrayal. It's everything the media loves." Elena's stomach turned. "What do I say to them?" "As little as possible. Christie's has prepared a statement. You thank your grandfather. You express hope that the collection will be appreciated, and you move on. Don't engage with questions about your family. Don't discuss the lawsuit. I don't give them ammunition. What if they ask about Carlos? You say, I'm focused on honoring my grandfather's legacy, and nothing else." That night, after Sofia was asleep in the suite's second bedroom, Elena stood at the window, watching the city lights. Somewhere out there, collectors and curators and wealthy strangers were preparing to bid on her grandfather's treasures. Tomorrow, pieces he had hidden for decades would be displayed for the world to see. She thought of him in that small house, living simply while surrounded by such wealth. What had driven him? Was it fear of his children taking the collection? Or was it something deeper, a belief that these pieces should be protected until the right person came along? Whatever his reasons, he had chosen her. And tomorrow, she would prove he had chosen wisely. The auction house was magnificent, a temple of marble and glass in the heart of Manhattan. Christie's had transformed one of their largest galleries for the event, hanging the major pieces with museum-quality lighting, each one accompanied by detailed placards explaining its provenance and significance. Elena arrived 2 hours before the auction began, escorted by Dr. Chen and Rebecca. Sophia had stayed at the hotel with a babysitter Christie's had arranged, much to her disappointment. But this was not a place for children. This was business, high stakes, and intense. As Elena walked through the gallery, seeing her grandfather's collection displayed for the first time, her breath caught. The paintings looked different here, transformed by professional presentation into something otherworldly. The garden scene, but the piece projected to sell for the highest amount, hung in a place of honor at the gallery's center, spotlit and magnificent. He had extraordinary taste, a voice said behind her. Elena turned to find a distinguished older man in an impeccable suit, his silver hair swept back, his eyes sharp with intelligence. "I'm sorry," she said. "Your grandfather. Dr. Chen told me about him. A postal worker, wasn't he? Who spent every spare dollar on art. I've been collecting for 40 years, and I don't have half the eye he had." The man extended his hand. "James Rothstein. I'll be bidding on several pieces this evening." Elena shook his hand, overwhelmed. "You knew about him?" "Everyone in this room knows the story. A hidden collection, preserved in secret for decades. It's the kind of discovery that happens once in a generation." He gestured to the garden scene. "That piece alone will change someone's life, perhaps mine, if I'm fortunate enough to acquire it." "You collect for yourself?" Elena asked. "Mostly for museums. I fund acquisitions, help institutions build their collections. Your grandfather's pieces will end up in museums eventually. That's where they belong, where people can see them, appreciate them." The thought comforted her. Her grandfather had not collected to hoard, but to preserve. Now his vision would reach beyond his lifetime. The auction began at 7. The gallery filled with hundreds of people, some in formal wear, others more casual, but no less wealthy. Phones were silenced, paddles distributed, tension crackling through the air like electricity. Elena sat in the front row, Rebecca on one side, Dr. Chen on the other. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone must hear it. The auctioneer, a woman with a crisp British accent, took the podium and began. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we present the Elena Vasquez collection, one of the most significant private collections to come to market in recent history. We begin with Lot 1. The first piece was a small watercolor, estimated to sell for $50,000. The bidding started at $30,000 and climbed quickly. Paddles rose throughout the room, numbers called out, the auctioneer's voice a rhythmic chant. In less than 3 minutes, it sold for $92,000. Elena felt lightheaded. One painting, more money than she used to make in 2 years, gone in 3 minutes. The auction continued, on piece after piece, selling for amounts that made her dizzy. A bronze sculpture went for $200,000, an oil portrait for $450,000, a landscape for $700,000. And then came the garden scene. The auctioneer's voice changed, taking on a note of reverence. Lot 27, the crown jewel of the Vasquez collection. Oil on canvas, authenticated as the work of one of the 20th century's most celebrated masters. A garden scene of extraordinary complexity and beauty, unseen by the public for more than 60 years. The starting bid was $10 million. Elena stopped breathing. A paddle rose immediately, then another. The auctioneer called numbers with machine-like precision as the bids climbed. 15 million, 20 million, 25 million. The room was electric. Every eye fixed on the painting, on the battle unfolding between bidders Elena could not see. She wanted to turn around, to watch, but found herself frozen, unable to move. 30 million. 40 million. $50 million. The bidding slowed, down to 2 competitors. James Rothstein, his paddle raised with steady confidence, and someone on the phone, a Christie's representative speaking rapidly in hushed tones. $60 million, $65 million, $70 million. The phone bidder hesitated. The auctioneer gave the traditional warning. At $70 million, fair warning, last chance. Silence stretched, tight and terrible. Sold! The gavel came down. To paddle number 47 for $70 million. The room erupted in applause. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. $70 million. For one painting. For her grandfather's painting, bought for probably a few $1,000s decades ago, now worth a fortune. Dr. Chen squeezed her hand. Breathe, Elena. She tried. The auction continued, but Elena barely registered the rest. More pieces sold, more millions accumulated. When it finally ended, 3 hours after it began, the total was staggering. The evening sales alone had netted $137 million, and there were more auctions to come. In the days following the auction, Elena's life became surreal. The sale made international news. Articles appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, art magazines, and blogs. Her photograph, taken as she left the auction house, appeared everywhere. "The waitress who inherited millions," one headline read. "Hidden fortune discovered in storage unit," said another. So interview requests flooded in. Morning shows, podcasts, documentaries. Christie's fielded them all, declining most, but accepting a few carefully chosen opportunities. Elena agreed to one interview with a respected art journalist who promised to focus on her grandfather's legacy rather than the sensational aspects. The interview took place in the Christie's gallery, with several of the collection's remaining pieces visible in the background. The journalist, a woman named Patricia Summers, was professional and thoughtful, asking about Ramon's life, his passion for art, what Elena remembered about him. He was quiet, Elena said, her voice soft. But when he talked about beauty, about things that mattered, his whole face would light up. I remember once, I was maybe 10 years old, and he took me to a museum. We stood in front of a painting for 20 minutes, just looking. I didn't understand why, but now I think he was teaching me to see. And now you've given the world a chance to see what he saw, Patricia said. Through this collection, his vision lives on. Elena had not thought of it that way, but the words resonated. Her grandfather was gone, but his legacy remained. Every person who saw these paintings, who stood before them and felt something, was experiencing a piece of what he had experienced. The remaining auctions took place over the following year, each one building on the success of the first. By the time the final piece sold, the total had reached exactly what Dr. Chen had predicted, $341 million. After commissions, taxes, and the donations Elena had committed to various museums, she netted $270 million. It was more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. But with the money came something she had not expected, a sense of purpose. The foundation she established in her grandfather's name became her passion. She hired staff, rented office space, began reviewing applications from students who needed help, from single mothers struggling as she had struggled, from community programs that lacked funding. The first scholarship recipient was a young girl named Rosa, the daughter of a janitor who wanted to study art history. Elena met her at the foundation's office, this shy 15-year-old with eyes full of dreams and fear that those dreams were impossible. "My teachers say I should be practical," Rosa said quietly. "That art history won't pay the bills." Elena thought of herself, of all the times she had been told to be practical, to accept her lot, to stop dreaming. "Your teachers are wrong," she said firmly. "Dreams are the most practical thing in the world. My grandfather was a postal worker, who became one of the greatest art collectors of his generation. Never let anyone tell you what you can't do. She approved Rosa's scholarship on the spot, full tuition plus living expenses. The girl cried, and Elena cried with her, remembering what it felt like to have no hope, and what it felt like when hope appeared. Over the months that followed, the foundation grew. Hundreds of scholarships awarded, dozens of programs funded. Elena received letters from recipients, from their parents, from teachers whose classrooms now had art supplies, from community centers that could offer classes they had never dreamed possible. And each letter was a piece of her grandfather's legacy, reaching further than any of them had imagined. One evening, nearly 2 years after that first auction, Elena sat in her home office reviewing applications when Sophia knocked on the door. "Mama, can I ask you something?" "Of course, mija." Elena set aside the papers and gave her daughter her full attention. Sophia was 9 now, growing taller, her questions deeper. "At school today, we learned about philanthropy, about people who give money to help others. My teacher said, you're a philanthropist." "I suppose I am," Elena said. "But why? You could keep all the money, buy anything you want. We could travel, or get a bigger house, or—" "We have everything we need," Elena interrupted gently. "A safe home, good food, a future that's secure. But there are so many people who don't have that. People like we used to be, remember?" Sophia nodded slowly. She was old enough to remember the old house, the eviction notice, the nights when dinner was sparse. "Abuelo gave us this money, but he didn't give it so we could hoard it. He gave it so we could honor what he loved. Beauty, art, education, opportunity. Every scholarship we give, every program we fund, is a way of saying thank you to him." "Do you think he knows?" Sophia asked. "Do you think he can see what you're doing?" Elena thought of the cemetery, of sitting by his grave, of the promises she had made. "I like to think so. I like to think he's proud." Sophia hugged her, and Elena held her daughter close, grateful for this moment, for this life, for the second chance her grandfather had given them both. The wardrobe still stood in Elena's bedroom, faithful and permanent. Sometimes, late at night, she would open its doors and run her hand along the false back panel, the secret compartment that had changed everything. It was empty now, the papers and catalogs safely stored in a climate-controlled vault. But the space remained, a reminder of what had been hidden, what had been found. She kept a single item in the compartment, the letter her grandfather had written to her grandmother, the one that had first hinted at the collection's existence. She would read it sometimes, when she needed to remember why she was doing this work, why the foundation mattered. "For Elena," he had written, "the only one who will understand." He had been right. She did understand, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure his legacy lived on, that his vision of beauty and possibility reached beyond his lifetime, touching lives he would never meet, but had somehow, through her, managed to save. The world had tried to make her small, to keep her invisible, but her grandfather had seen her, had believed in her, had given her the tools to become more than anyone expected, and she had risen to meet that faith, transforming not just her own life, but the lives of countless others. All because of a wardrobe everyone told her to trash and a grandfather who had known, somehow, that she would be the one to understand. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.